In today's gospel text from Mark, we get one of the most often repeated quotes from Jesus' teachings: repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. But what does that mean? And one of the reasons I love this, not just that line, but this story, is I think the story gives us a lot of insight into what Jesus of Nazareth was like beyond what he taught. So we know that Jesus of Nazareth, we believe that Jesus of Nazareth is the incarnate Word of God made flesh, the Son of God. But we get a little insight here about what he was like as a human being. That he wasn't just intelligent with kind of book smarts, but also that he was clever. In fact, in this story, I think what we get, he was funny. And it takes a little bit, if you've ever been in a different country, or you're multilingual, or even if you've just gone from the United States to England or Australia, you know that one of the hardest things to translate from one language or culture to another is the jokes. So to understand this as funny, we need to do a little bit of work and figure out what's going on here in first century Jerusalem. And what we find is the story starts with something that's weird. Some Pharisees and Herodians were sent to Jesus to ensnare him in his speech. Who are Pharisees? Who are Herodians? These aren't just generic terms for Jewish authorities. These are two really different kinds of ways of being Jewish in first century Jerusalem. The Herodians, the name comes from the word Herod, is kind of a catch-all term for all of the people associated with the Jewish civil government, the people that worked for Herod the Great, who was king when Jesus was born, and his son Herod, who was king at this period, but all of the Jewish authorities and associated elites who were working at the head of Jewish society on behalf of the Roman Empire. So they're not kings in their own right anymore. Palestina, this area, Judea, this is a province of the Roman Empire. And these are the Jewish leaders and authorities who are working to keep people in line on behalf of their Roman masters. The Pharisees are a more interesting and difficult to describe case. The Pharisees often get a really bad rap in all of our New Testament scriptures, and it seems to be the case that because their message is not 180 degrees different from Jesus's, but some ways rather similar to Jesus's, that they come into conflict, especially in the decades after Jesus's death. So the Pharisees were a religious movement, and a religious movement that in many ways was looking for God to restore Israel, looking for God to restore the independence of the nation, looking for God to bring people back from exile. But unlike some of the more military revolutionary groups that we call the Zealots, didn't think that violence was the answer. They instead thought that fidelity to Torah, observance of Torah, careful observance of the law, and a renewed spiritual life was what was going to restore the covenant with God and therefore have God restore Israel to its glory. So some of them would probably cooperate with the Herodians and the temple authorities. Some of them were probably much more radically not cooperating with them. But in any case, the moment you see Herodians and Pharisees walking down the street together and doing something together with you, Jesus knows something's up. In our world, it'd be like a Democrat and a Republican both came up to him and said, "Hey, we got a question for you." Jesus has got his antenna are up, and they ask him, "Is it lawful?" Meaning, is it religiously lawful? Is it legitimate, if you want to be an observant Jew, to pay the tax to Caesar? This tax that every adult male had to pay as a citizen, that was part of this direct signal of Jewish subservience to the Roman Empire. If he says yes, well, then at least some of the Pharisees, maybe these ones here, and definitely the crowd of people around them, are going to turn on Jesus for saying that you should be supporting the Roman Empire. If he says no, well, then you are saying that you're doing a direct act of treason against the empire. You're encouraging people to disobey their authorities. So they're trying to catch Jesus in a catch-22, and how does he get out of it? He asks for the coin. Now, the coin here, I know this is getting very nerdy, but trust me, it's worth it. The coin here, this denarius that he asked for, what's going to be on it? Big picture of Caesar. The image of Caesar is going to be right on it. And this is where Jesus says, okay, whose image is this? Caesar's. We'll give to Caesar what's for Caesar's and give to God what belongs to God. And everyone's amazed, it says. Now, believe it or not, I think this is If you can imagine Jesus not just saying that in a solemn, dignified way, but instead imagine him laughing at that or smiling a little bit and someone in the back of the crowd going, ah, that's funny. Because he's gotten out of the catch-22, but he's done it in a way where he's not offended either party. And like many good jokes, he's also saying something important by doing it. What's he saying that's important? Where does this have relevance to us? Well, first, it might have relevance because if we want to pay attention to the main thing here, is to say, let's repay to God what belongs to God. That we are not necessarily doing an older style of interpreting this that says that, well, that means church and politics should never be the same. So much else in Jesus' message is about how the way we believe influences our political decisions and our common social life. Instead, what we have is Jesus saying, what's most important here? What do you want to repay to God? The second thing I think is interesting is what's the image on the coin? We have an image of the emperor. What's the image of God? Well, the human beings he's living and working with. We are the image and likeness of God. So what do we owe to God? Not the coin, but ourselves. What is he telling us here? We owe something to God that's more important than money, more important than some of our political decisions, more important than anything that would be ahead of God in our world. We owe ourselves to God, individually and as a society. So what Jesus, I think, is telling us today in a bit is, with a little bit of laughter, hopefully, maybe you get the joke a little better now, is how do you think about what you want to give to God in return for the coin that is you, for being the image of that God?